の果てまでどうかお付き合いくださいませ。何かと目をかけていただいてマルゼンさんには頭が下がります。ご恩には報いなければですね。イベントが始まりましたね。のんびりマイペースに、でも必勝を期して頑張りましょう。まっすぐ挑まれるとこちらもまっすぐ返したくなるんですよね。スケちゃんからこの時期は寝不足になりがちで、トレーナーさんは気になりません？部屋に迷い込んだ虫の羽音って。
Welcome back to the number one time.
焦らずのんびり落ち着いて、忙しくてもリラックス。大事なのは平常心ですよ。馬娘の頂点を目指すこの道、その果てまでどうかお付き合いくださいませ。エルったら納豆をホットソースで混ぜて食べるんですよ。こんな伝統に唾吐く行い許せません。イベントが始まりましたね。のんびりマイペースに、でも必勝を期して頑張りましょう。まっすぐ挑まれるとこちらもまっすぐ返したくなるんですよね。スペちゃんから馬娘の頂点を目指すこの道、その果てまでどうかお付き合いくださいませ。この時期は寝不足になりがちで、トレーナーさんは気になりません？部屋に迷い込んだ虫の羽音って。この衣装を身にまとったからには無様な姿などさらせませんね。決して。
Podcast in the world, the All In podcast. We're back. We got the original crew here. It's a tight foursome with me again. He's returned from, I believe, the UAE. And Mina, the one, the only, your chairman, your dictator, Shamat Palihapati. He puts the dick in dick. That's what they all say. How you doing?
Good. You?
So you went and you got that, what's that beautiful airline we all take to the region?
Emirates first class, yeah.
Oh, Emirates first class cabin
It's insane.
with the wine. Take everybody in because I do business class for 14 dimes round trip.
Emirates is unbelievable. The problem is there's like literally 1,000 movies. 1,000. So you have to
Yes.
like favorite out 30 or 40 of them. There was like 95 different menu choices. I had probably 8,000 calories.
Oh, Really? And that was just the wine, I take it? Yeah.
By the way, the wine is incredible. The wine list, like 1996 Montrose, and I was like, is this I had never seen an airline wine list. It was pretty strong.
Did you bring your sommelier, Josh? Was he in the cabin next to you with his own?
I didn't need it. No, I didn't need it.
I like that. And of course, your Sultan of Science. We got a great docket for him. It's kind of like the Super Bowl for Sultan fans this week. Because, yeah.
I hope I deliver, bro. I mean,
well,
you're putting
Trump
the pressure
cured
on
autism, and you're going to comment on it. This is a pretty big deal. It's a pretty big deal.
Let your winners ride.
Rain Man David Sack.
We open source it to the fans, and they've just gone crazy with it.
Love you, Wesley.
Originally said it would be 100,000. Okay, listen. The topic of the week: H-1B visas are being overhauled. Trump administration announced a new $100,000 fee for all future H-1B applications. It's a one-time fee. There's been a little confusion about it and the details, but you know that's how they. They do things in the 47th. There's some excitement, a big announcement, and then we figure out the details. Lutnick originally said it would be 100. $100,000 a year, but then the White House clarified it will be a one-time fee. This is a huge jump. The current fee is nothing. It's like $2 to $5K that you pay to the government. You might pay a lawyer, double that or triple that to do the work for you if you're a big corporation. This hits on a lot of the Trump campaign promises, tougher on immigration, looking out for U.S. workers. We've talked before here about the abuse in the H-1B system. I'll give some of my personal insights in that after I throw to you, Chamath. And before I do, they had an interesting poly market. Will courts block Trump's 100K H-1B by September 30th? 3% chance of that happening. So it looks like everybody's kind of aligned with them with this program. All right, Sachs, I know you're on the road, but your fans demand to hear your take on this. What's your?
I think it's a good idea to have this $100,000 fee, and I'll tell you the reason why is because right now there's something like 5 times as many H-1B applications as there are slots. So I think they grant about 85,000 H-1Bs a year, and many more apply for it. And as a result, they have a lottery where they just they randomly choose who the winners are going to be. And if you look over the past decade, roughly half the H-1Bs go to these like IT consulting firms. Yes. And the average salary is like $65,000 a year. So it kind of puts the lie to this idea that you hear that H-1Bs are for like high-skilled engineers, AI researchers, things like that. That's not in practice what happens. In practice, what happens is you have this lottery, and a huge chunk of them end up going to low-end IT jobs. And I think by putting this $100,000 fee on it, you encourage the applications to go to the actual higher skilled, higher paid jobs where there's actually a shortage of Americans. And you encourage US companies to try to fill those jobs with Americans first. And so I think, putting aside some of the details, I think the big picture here is that they're using market forces to put some scarcity around the H-1B application. And I think what that's going to do is encourage applicants to actually be these higher paid, higher skilled jobs that the program is supposed to be for, instead of these lower end IT shop shops.
Yeah, these are supposed to be for highly specialized workers. I can tell you You know, when I was in IT in the early 90s, the abuse was happening all the time, and it was indentured servitude. It was disgraceful. The IT people would hire typically Indians, and they would say stuff to the effect of, these guys are going to work for half as much and twice as long, and they can't say no. That's the best part of it. They can't say no when we put them on weekend coverage. They can't say no if we want to do a build out and they have to work 10 days in a row, because we can kick them out of the country and they have 30 days to find a new job. And so it's a giant scam on the bottom half of these. I witnessed it firsthand. Every discussion I've ever had about H-1Bs, you know, in relation to IT and consulting has always been about saving money. And the truth is, it's been abused. And I talked about this in 2015 on CNBC, Chamath, when Trump first started to talk about it. He's been on this for a while. And it's just great to see them. I had suggested $20K a year, and that's kind of where they wound up. I additionally think they should do an auction for 1/3 of these. Let all these big tech companies that are truly trying to get in very unique PhDs from Oxford in AI, man, let them just put out how many they want to buy and at what price, do a reverse auction, and fill 1/3 of them with, I don't know, maybe OpenAI or XAI, or Microsoft jumps the fence and pays $100K, $200K per person. What do you think, Chamath, just broadly speaking on this and the policy, the abuse, everything?
I came to the United States initially on a TN visa, which is the NAFTA visa between Canada and America. And then I switched to an H-1B, and then I got my green card and my citizenship in early 2010s. Elon came in on an H-1B, Sundar Pichai came on an H-1B, Satya Nadella came in on an H-1B. There's a lot of folks that have done a lot of good things that have used this specific visa. That being said, I think Sachs is right that people have found an end around and have been abusing this H-1B system. There was an incredibly exhaustive thread by Robert Sterling, I think it was about a year ago, but I wanted to use that as a jumping off point to explain a couple of reasons why I think that there's been rampant abuse. The first thing is the H-1B program is supposed to be 85,000 visas a year. But here is the data. And so what you see is that in many years, including the last several, it's been upwards of 10 times that number. And so there are a lot of people that are getting shoehorned into this program. And when you see this, you can start to see why a lot of people are saying that there is wage suppression and that it's taking away from American jobs. Because if the program was meant to be for 85,000, you would think, well, listen, that's a drop in the bucket. Nobody would feel that in the American economy. But when you start talking about almost 1 million people a year, 600,000 to 1 million a year, that starts to be perceptible. And that is absorbing a lot of revenue and wages that would otherwise go to domestic-born and legal immigrants that are already here. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is there was a myth that these H-1Bs were these extremely highly skilled people. And what Robert found out in the data is that actually no, it's not really that case. And so I think the average salary, I just want to get this exactly right, it's slightly under $120,000. Now, if you started to tell me that these were the best-in-class PhDs in all of these whiz-bang industries where the companies are raising billions and billions of dollars, you guys already know that this salary would not pass the smell test. Most executive assistants at tech startups make more than $119,000 a year. So the idea that some qualified grad is making this should already sort of set off alarm bells that maybe where there's smoke, there's fire. So that's the second thing. So number one, we've been over allocating by 5 to 10x. Number two, these salaries aren't these incredible salaries that you think of, which tends to mean that there is the potential, as Jason, you said, in some form of indentured servitude and wage suppression. That's not good. And then the third thing is you would ask the question, well, who gets these things? And it turns out, as Sachs said, a large plurality of these visas don't actually go to American companies that are looking to hire talent to make this American business do better. These are foreign companies that are arbitraging labor and bringing people in.
So crazy.
Cognizant is not an American business.
Tata?
Infosys is not an American business. Tata, Wipro. It's not to say that that in and of itself is wrong, but you need to find the right visa class to do this under.
Well, they're hacking you.
And so when you put all of this together, I think the sort of broad take. Takeaway is from where this started and what it was intended to do, we've deviated pretty wildly, and I think that this is a very important reset. Now, the last comment I want to make is about the people that say, hold on, we are going to cut our nose off to spite our face, and it's going to stop an inflow of incredible talent. And what I would just remind people is that it is really important to remember that when you are in the United States for a master's or PhD, you already get an automatic visa. It's called OPT. So you have multiple years when you graduate from a useful degree program in the United States to find a job. I have several of these folks that work for me at 8090. These are incredible grads from Carnegie Mellon. They are off the charts smart, but because they did a master's or a PhD, they come with a couple of years, and you can oftentimes extend that. And that will give us a very good amount of time to figure out how exceptional they are. And then, quite honestly, I would gladly pay the $100,000 to get these guys on an H-1B program. So I think if we're going to try to return this to what it was meant to be, which is to help American companies excel, get the best and the brightest, these changes, I think, are very good measures to course correct and get us towards that.
And to just give people the history of this was something that was started after World War II to get really specialized people like Polish and German, like geniuses, building out rockets. And I had a really interesting discussion. If you could pull this tweet up, there's another sinister wrinkle to this. I had this gentleman, Colin, on, and he went to apply for a product manager. I had him on this week, so I was my other podcast. And he applied and sent a resume with the reference number to the specific job, Freebird, that he wanted at a company in New York. And he did this because in order to have an H-1B visa, you have to put the job in a newspaper, right? So what these companies allegedly are doing is putting these jobs in these like obscure newspapers so that Americans don't see them. They're not putting them in places, you know, that you might see them. And there's a group of Americans who are going and finding these jobs and saying to Americans, go ahead and apply. Here's the shadow jobs, I think is what they call them. And so he put the reference number in there and they wouldn't even interview him. And I talked to him and he's kind of crestfallen. He's like, you know, I would like to apply for this job, but it's obvious that I can't get into it. This is like, I think just shows the entitlement of these tech companies. And I don't know New Relic's position on this. They can email us and I'll give it in the next episode. But they're basically listing fake jobs. And somebody, Abby from People Ops over there, just kind of doesn't even let him interview for the job. The whole thing is just really dirty at the low end. And at the high end, it's under monetized. So, Freebird, your thoughts on this? I know you have a lot of friends. You're an immigrant yourself. I'm not sure how you got here and what visa you came under. But I think it came when you were a kid, right? I'm not sure what your parents came under, but what are your thoughts on this and the impact it might have?
Well, I think there should be two separate programs for what we could call highly skilled workers. What you were referring to, after the end of World War II, there was a secret U.S. operation called Operation Paperclip, where we tried to recruit German scientists and engineers. Between 1945 and 1959, America recruited, I think, 1,600 of these scientists. So it was both, call it disabling to an American rival or adversary, but also expansive, because that was when the nuclear industry was growing and much of nuclear science was being pioneered in the earlier days in Germany. And so the kind of American workforce expanded, but more importantly, a new industry was able to be enabled and unlocked and grown in the US. And then the German state was disabled by losing these scientists. One could make the case that a similar sort of scenario should exist today, that we should have a second Operation Paperclip. And perhaps it should be a continuing process rather than necessarily kind of this laissez-faire process that we have today, where we identify some of the top industries and the top scientists and the top domains and go after those scientists proactively with government action, government support, in partnership with private industry. If you look at papers being published across mainstream scientific journals, the majority of papers today across nearly every scientific domain are being published out of China. And this ranges from physics to chemistry to material science to biotech. And there's a real case to be made that perhaps those scientists would be better off, and America would be better off, if they were doing their research, pioneering here rather than there.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a very good strategic case to be made that perhaps like a more directed, high energy, high effort kind of Operation Paperclip be undertaken again around the world. The H-1B program, I do agree, has been heavily abused as a way of kind of compensation arbitrage. And, you know, if you find a highly qualified, excellent talent, as we all know, for a high-skilled laborer in engineering or science today, that person, if you amortize the H-1B over 7 years at $100K, that application fee, that's $15K a year, call it. That certainly seems worth it for the right sort of talent. And it forces the question about, can this person be found in the United States or not? The alternative would be to force a higher salary range, such that you as a company are now basically being forced to pay a higher salary, which means you have to justify that this person is worth it to bring them in from an ex-US, and you can't find the talent locally. I'll tell you a program where we do this, where it doesn't work in the US, is called the H-2A program. This is the immigrant farm worker program that we use for temporary labor on farms. And the way that program is set up today is you have to pay the farm worker that comes in on an H-2A some amount over minimum wage. And the amount that you have to pay over minimum wage is a function of the average wage in that state across all industry. In the case of Florida, they're paying $5 to $10 over minimum wage for farm workers, and they cannot get any Americans to work on the farm. And they're being forced to pay $5 to $10 overage. And by the way, these farmers and these farm businesses are being heavily subsidized by the government. One way to think about the ridiculousness of what's going on is the US taxpayer is paying a premium salary to foreign workers. What we should be doing is enabling, when there's no workers available in the US, we should be enabling a free flow of labor, but only in the case where there's no workers available in the US. But there is a downside to that model, as we're now seeing in the ag industry. Farmers are losing money across the board, and they're having to pay a premium for foreign workers to come and work on the farm, and they can't get US workers. There's two sides to the sword on this, is my point. But I do think this Operation Paperclip notion should be taken on as a separate kind of strategic mandate.
Absolutely, yeah. And that was a lot of the Jewish scientists had already fled Germany. My understanding, Paperclip was for the Nazis, the former Nazi scientists. And they were working on some pretty dark and cutting-edge stuff in chemical and biological. It just wasn't rockets, right?
Well, it was everything.
It was everything.
Remember, at this era, we were just developing quantum theory, and quantum theory led to nuclear science, which led to the development of the atomic bomb. So, yeah, I think Operation Paperclip was pretty far-reaching. But today, as an American, you really want all of the cutting-edge research in material science, in physics, in chemistry, etc., to accrue to China? Or should we be thoughtful about it's intellectual talent that's making these breakthroughs? It's not necessarily institutional capacity. It's not like they have better institutions per se than we do. We have amazing institutions, amazing capacity, amazing place to live, and so on. So there's a real kind of mandate that we should probably think about undertaking here, not just for extension of our industry base, industrial base, but also for disabling what we would consider rivals, or what Americans might consider rivals.
Just on this Operation Paperclip point, it's interesting that China, the Chinese.
back to the number one
The government took away the passports of the engineers at DeepSeek after the launch of that model, or at least it was publicly reported. I can't attest to this from firsthand knowledge, but there were definitely a lot of reports about this, and you can see why. I mean, if we could recruit or snap up a few hundred or at most a couple of thousand of these top AI engineers, that'd be a game changer
Totally.
in the AI race. So China start to see those people as a strategic asset, and they're not going to let them immigrate, I don't think. But it would be something for us to think about. Certainly on the chip design front, there's probably just a few thousand people. That's all we're talking about. That would be a game changer on that side, although they're largely in Taiwan, not China. And again, I don't think the Taiwanese government's going to be too excited for us to snap them all up and move them to America. But in both these fields, there are a relatively small number of people, kind of like in the space race, who, if they were all in America, it'd be a huge game changer.
Here's the thing. We do have a really rich diversity of people from all around the world in higher ed institutions in the United States, getting masters and getting PhDs. We just need to be better organized about what to do with them. And we need to sort of reach out to those people, build relations with them, take advantage of OPT, and then we can always create a different class of visa for them. We have the ability to do these things called national interest waivers. So all of the infrastructure exists. And I think that if we can clean the decks on the H-1B stuff, it'll give people a lot more incentive to support the national interest waiver concept. I think the reason why people don't believe in this entire immigration conversation is on every part of the distribution of immigration, people see problems. They see an open border on the one
Well, they're worried
side.
it's going to be abused. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's abuse, and it feels terrible.
There's been too many of these horror stories where an American is told to train their H-1B replacement who's making 25% as much.
Look, I shouldn't even tell this story, but it was told to me yesterday. And I don't know this to be true, so I don't want to fan the flames of speculation here. But what I was told is that in certain countries, there are these puppy farms that essentially get these kids onboarded into US colleges. They're not the great colleges, but they are decent enough in all far-flung corners of America. Get them into master's programs, they pay for their school, and then these folks have to then send money back to pay off their degree. So if that's happening, then these kids are being abused as well. Right?
Yeah.
So the whole thing has just completely run amok, and I think we need to clean it up. At that point, we have the chance of rebuilding trust, where then we can propose what Friedberg talked about, and everybody would be supportive because they see that the system works as intended.
I think closing of the border, I think, has made people feel a lot better about it, because that was so abused that people just look at immigration in one bucket and they don't separate it into multiple buckets. There's compassionate, people who are true dissidents who we want to show compassion for. It's a small number of people. Then you have all these folks who were being taken with mules and coyotes over the border, and then using that same compassionate designation and abusing that. And when you do see that abuse, I think people, when they hear Trump come on here, and when he was a presidential candidate, President Trump came on and said, hey, we're going to staple a green card right to those degrees. And then he immediately got backlash. Well, now I think if things have calmed down, and now President Trump and the administration have the high ground, they can say, look, we closed the border. Now we should have a really thoughtful discussion. We're giving these people American educations. They want to start companies. They want to build our companies. They want to build products and services. Those products and services are going to create more jobs. And look, we're at 4% unemployment, 4.x. We're in good shape because we closed the border. And that's where you had millions of people coming in. And that was the true problem. And this isn't the actual problem.
You make a really great point, Takeout. I mean, using the one word immigration to wrap up all of people that are coming to the United States, I think masks the real series of things or set of things that are underlying people seeking asylum, people in need, but then also people that we want to go attract and bring here actively. And it's probably not the right term to use just the word immigration.
The word you want to use
it should have a qualifier
recruitment.
and a qualifier for every term. Yeah,
the term is recruitment, what you described, the paperclip mode. That's recruitment. Then you have dissidence, and that is compassion. for true dissidents. And then
And
there's
family.
and family. Great. So you have compassionate dissidents and family members. And then you have this big thing in the middle, which is everybody in the world wants to live here. Everybody can't. That's immigration. And so just put it in 3 buckets, and then our leaders need to have discussions, 3 different discussions, and have it in a thoughtful way, not muddy the waters and politicize this. That's what's been causing such a big problem. Both sides of this argument have been so charged. Hopefully now that the biggest one has been deathly done by Trump.
Trump said it at the UNGA. He said, you know how many people have crossed the border since I came into office? He said exactly 0.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's incredible.
I mean, we have the greatest military in the world. We can't close the border to people who are coming on, with backpacks across the border. Like, we should be able to secure the border with drones and cameras.
It was done deliberately. They opened the border, and you know that.
Of course.
Because remember when Texas tried to put up barbed wire to enforce their own border,
That's right.
the Biden-controlled Border Patrol got rid of it. They removed it.
That was a tell.
So this was done deliberately.
Yeah. That was a perfect tell. Like, I remember when we talked about that last year. That was the total tell. Okay, Freeberg, some major news in science this week. Let's talk about autism and the press conference that happened this week with Bob Kennedy and President Trump. Here's the chart. Autism has increased dramatically over the years. There's a big debate. What's causing this? And there's obviously correlations. There's causations. There's the testing of this. And maybe we're just testing a little bit too loosely around this, but we went from 1 in 10,000 in 1970 to 1 in 1,000 in 1995 to 1 in 32 in 2022. The press conference, Freeberg, was a little spicy and unique, performative maybe, were some of the criticisms, but there's a real issue here. And why don't you take us through it and educate us so we can kind of get to reality, because the press is having a field day with this, obviously, on both sides.
I think autism, just like Alzheimer's, there may be several underlying conditions that lead to what we would call the phenotype of autism. That is what we all observe as autism. It's considered a spectrum disorder. There's many different variations of it. There may actually be many different underlying conditions or underlying drivers, biological drivers, that are causing it. One of the drivers that came up during the press conference and in the subsequent interviews that Marty McCary, head of the FDA, has done is that they've identified and shared papers that have been out for some time that there is a receptor that absorbs folate, a type of vitamin D, and that folate receptor may be attacked by the immune system, and as a result, you can't really uptake vitamin D, and so those cells dysfunction, and when those cells are dysfunctional, you end up having what looks like what we call autism. And so one of the things that they announced is they're going to work on getting the label updated for leucovorin, which will resolve, for many people, the folate receptor issue. The other thing they brought up is a paper that was done by Andrea Baccarelli, who's dean of the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. This paper is a bit old, where he took several studies and analyzed them and showed that across 46 studies, 9 of them showed no association with acetaminophen, the main active ingredient Tylenol. 4 showed a negative association, meaning it was actually protective and good for the fetus. And 27 had a slightly positive association, which means that it was having some contributory effect to both ADHD and autism spectrum disorder when women would take acetaminophen while pregnant. And Nick, if you want to just pull up that image from the paper, this is the original paper that was published by Baccarelli. So again, he didn't do any primary research. He didn't actually go and study patients. He took the data from 46 other studies, and then he added it all together to run this kind of macro analysis. And you can see here that he showed some risk. There's no specific way to quantify that risk, but there's some increased risk of having attention deficit hyperactivity or autism as a result of taking acetaminophen while pregnant. Now, I think autism, again, one of the underlyings might be this autoimmune condition associated with the folate receptor. What causes autoimmunity is a whole nother conversation, and we can get into the vaccine stuff if you guys want to, because there's obviously a lot of conversations going on right now about the immune system being primed to have kind of an auto antibody response, but there may be other things contributing to it. So I think it's pretty clear that our modern world, in the last couple of decades, there's a cumulative effect of environmental exposures that children are getting, whether it's microplastics, whether it's chemicals in the food, whether it's just the environmental exposure in the air related to small molecules, whether it's related to other things we're putting in our body. Every one of these things, the way to think about it is maybe if it has a positive effect, it might increase your chance of autism by 0.05%. And then another thing might increase your chance by 0.07%, and so on and so forth. And so when you add up all the things in our environment, there may be a cumulative effect that has a result in different underlying conditions in our body that may result in what looks like things that we call autism. And so none of these are very specific. There's one shot and one path and one specific thing. And I think that's very important.
Yeah, let me just ask two clarifying questions really lightning for you, Freeberg. Number one, for the audience, how is autism diagnosed in these studies? Is there a blood test, a genetic test, or is it just a bunch of questions? I know the answer, but I wanted you to clarify it for everybody. And then how does the geographical differences in autism, just like we saw with trans kids, there's many in certain cities and none in others. So maybe you could talk a little bit about those two issues, which I think many people have been talking about.
So I don't think that there's one specific diagnostic test for autism as if it was one disease. Again, these are phenotypes, these are behaviors that are being measured that people call autism spectrum disorder. And so the diagnostic criteria falls under a set of screening and behavioral tests that go on. And, one of the things that there's a survey, there's an observation, and there's a bunch of things.
Is it like a score? Is it a score?
Yeah, so there's a scoring system, exactly. And so then there's different levels.
What did you and Zach score?
Yeah, where are you guys? We could bet. Hold on, before you tell us, Chamath and I are going to bet on it. I'm going to say that Zach beats Freeberg by 16 points.
Make it over under.
Over under? I think these guys are. Well, who's highest on the spectrum?
Well, Zach may have gotten in the 90th percentile.
He's definitely in the 90th percentile. I put Freeberg in the 70th.
We need a poly market. What did Zach Freeberg get on the score?
By the way, just to go back on the acetaminophen study.
So great.
Oh, look, there's the emotional detachment. Go ahead, Freeberg. Go ahead.
No reaction. You and I are laughing.
Well, I mean, I'm making an active choice not to engage. But
I am making an active choice to repress my emotions.
One thing to note, and one of the controversies about all of this, the paper that was published by this guy Baccarelli from, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, from Harvard, it's actually been challenged because in 2023, he was called as an expert witness in a lawsuit against the maker of Tylenol. And in that lawsuit, the judge threw out his testimony as unreliable because he was being paid $150,000 to give the expert testimony to work on the case. And so because of the payment that
whose side was he on?
So this is the guy who published the paper that linked, that showed an increase
in the expert testimony. Was he pro Tylenol or
anti-Tylenol? So he was an expert witness for the lawyers that were filing the claim against Tylenol. I will say in the last couple of days since this press conference, he has publicly said that we are not yet certain or sure about the link. And I want to remind everyone that this association study indicates an increased risk. But that doesn't mean that if you take Tylenol, your child is going to have autism. That doesn't mean that there's a determinism here. There is a statistical chance that there is a slight increase, and the more acetaminophen you take, the more the chance. And that's what the paper shows.
Let me take the other side of this. Here's what we know. We know for sure that there is this potential autoimmune issue that you, as the mother, can express as an antibody. There's an antibody test for it. We also know that the child can be tested for it. So at a minimum, we're now at a point where we can create a very thorough, well-funded study to get to the core of this issue. Separately, to the extent that you do test positive there will be some doctors and some parents that may decide to take leucovorin prophylactically and then also to administer it to the child before it's clear whether they do or do not have autism. I have several friends who have kids on the spectrum. I talk to them about leucovorin. What they say is that when you have extreme autism, the drug is very effective. But when you have kids that are more sort of mild on the spectrum, then there's a lot of benefit from behavioral modifications and behavioral training, and that it's not clear how effective that drug is. But in one specific case, one of my friends is considering it for their child. Here's the point, though. I think the point is that we need to test for this. And I think that some combination of governments and industry should come together. Beyond that, the point that I want to make, though, is, and I think Friedberg, I don't think you're adding to the conversation when you say that there's no determinism, because on the off chance that there is, I would say that we don't know yet. When you see women taking acetaminophen in this performative art way, basically to like try to like pwn Donald Trump, and it's all over TikTok and it's all over X, I just think it's reckless, and I think it solves nothing. You're supposed to go talk to your doctor about it in all weather conditions anyways. But then when you transform it into some sort of like protest vote without really knowing, I think is really dumb.
Yeah, and this test, by the way, Chamath, I'll say this folate receptor autoantibody, there has been a test available, I think, since 2012. This has been around for some time. In fact, there
cancer
was a
patients
paper,
take this test, of course. Because
yeah, and there was a paper published on this. I'm trying to find this paper. I'm not sure how much follow-up there's been. This is a SUNY paper where these guys went and found folks that were scored very high on the autism spectrum disorder diagnostic test, and they found a high prevalence. Over 70% had this folate receptor autoantibody. This was one paper, so I don't want to give it like a ton of credence. There's a lot of follow-up that's happened since then, and I'm not an expert in this space, but I did kind of do some research on what the history is of this. And so this is a very well-known kind of correlative effect, and it could be a very big contributor. But obviously, like, no one should feel like, hey, if I don't have autoantibody, then my kid is fine. That doesn't necessarily mean the case. Again, there may be several paths to autism. And the thing about acetaminophen, just like, hey, have a drink or smoke a cigarette, the more you do, the higher the risk. This is the case with anything we put in our body. And I think that's the point about like what they've identified in the paper that was published regarding acetaminophen. And so there's still a lot to be kind of determined on how they're going to provide guidance to women that are pregnant on, do you have a fever? Do you take it for pain? What's the right criteria?
Let's just say we all agree, medicating yourself to make a political point is dumb.
Hilarious. What are we doing? That can't be true.
It's absolutely idiotic.
Absolutely
It's
happy
stupid.
this is true.
It's
stupid.
Art.
It's
Yeah.
stupid.
Yeah.
I think for his next trick, President Trump should warn people not to snort rat poison.
Yes, also not a good idea.
Somebody was tweeting, next President Trump's going to recommend not using toasters while you're in the bathtub,
Yeah.
just to see what people do.
My fellow
Who's this guy?
Americans, in light of recent studies, I wanted to warn against the use of toasters in your bathtub or your
Toasters.
shower.
Don't do it. Don't put the toaster in the...
You know, people are going to do it if he tells them not to.
Exactly. I mean, I have such an inappropriate joke right now. I'm not going to say it.
Let's take Friedberg's math. When I saw that, and you think maybe there's a 0.05% chance. Well, guess what? If you stack that up and it actually turns out to be true across the thousands of women that then performatively did this idiotically, you could actually have an extra kid or two with autism that didn't need to have it. What is going on in America?
Well, look,
Yeah.
I think there were a lot of people who instantly had a snarky reaction because it was Trump and Bobby Kennedy making these claims about Tylenol, and the media played into that. And look, I don't know what the truth of it is, but there are...
Even Tylenol tells you to not take it. They say call your doctor.
Yeah, exactly.
How stupid are these people?
There are plenty of articles establishing this risk. There's a paper from Johns Hopkins from 2019 called Taking Tylenol During Pregnancy Associated with Elevated Risk for Autism and ADHD.
Pull this up. This is to your point. This is CNN's coverage on when these acetaminophen studies came out historically. And you can see that when it was announced at the Trump conference yesterday, they said Trump links autism to acetaminophen use during pregnancy, despite decades of evidence it's safe. And then if you read back, so this is 2017, 2016, acetaminophen during pregnancy may increase risk of hyperactivity. Studies linked acetaminophen in
So when
pregnancy. to
Trump
ADHD.
says it,
So when Trump
they
says it,
take the negative out.
that's in the headline. In the headline, they dismiss it.
I
But
mean,
every other
just don't
time,
get
every
you-
other time they've taken the paper and they've published the news article on the paper itself. I just couldn't believe this. All this like CNN. Yeah.
They ignore all their previous reporting on the subject. I mean, that's what's kind of crazy about it.
This supercut was hilarious. Check out the. This is the supercut of Trump saying Tylenol. It was hilarious.
Don't take Tylenol. Don't take it. With Tylenol, don't take it. Don't take it. Don't use Tylenol. Don't take Tylenol. Don't take Tylenol. Fight like hell not to take it. Because you shouldn't take it.
It's just hilarious how he presents information. Just, don't take Tylenol. Don't take Tylenol. Great week for Motrin, though. So I heard sales are up for
Well,
them.
no, because it's also been established
know.
for a very long time. You don't take ibuprofen aspirin.
Yeah, you
Those
definitely
two
don't
things
take
are
ibuprofen.
even worse.
Yeah,
even worse,
ibuprofen
yeah.
is terrible if you're pregnant.
So
Do
wait a
not
minute.
take-
Why?
yeah, high
Why
risk.
is it specifically that this one mechanism of action was completely inoculated, and every other mechanism of action for things like pain relief and headaches are known to be pretty bad for women and babies? Come on, guys.
Yeah. Freeberg, explain to us the disparity in different regions of the world and autism. Would you think that's the surveys and maybe people in the United States are a little more...
Again, I'm not an expert in this stuff,
Yeah.
Jake Al. I can opine on kind of what I've read and I've done some studying,
Yeah.
but think about my like level of knowledge being in the range of hours compared to years, which
Oh, well, no,
which yeah. But I would
I'm
say
a
like
complete expert on this because I've watched all seasons of Love on the Spectrum. And
Right.
I love that show.
Yeah.
Have you
No,
seen
but-
that show, Bob? Love on the Spectrum?
What is it?
Oh, watch it with Nat. She'll love it. It's great.
I do agree with the general notion that we have a cumulative effect. Like many studies that are done, by the way, are very organized around short duration, high exposure when it relates to novel molecules in the environment and how we're exposed to them.
Yeah.
The cumulative long-term effect of these things, as we learned recently with respect to like the amount of microplastics and the endocrine disrupting nature of microplastics, where they can actually bind to specific receptors and as a result block the expression or binding of other proteins, which can have a systemic kind of effect on you. We didn't realize that until recently, after we've been making plastics for 70 years. And then we didn't realize these plastics were breaking down and cumulatively kind of, growing in our environment, in our water supply, as
In
a
our
result,
balls. You
in
can
our
say it.
food, in our balls, in our brains, in our hearts. And so what are these molecules doing as they accumulate in our body? And that now needs to be studied and understood. And then we have this big, challenging industrial question of what do we do about it? But that's true for nearly every novel molecule we've developed over the past 100 years on Earth. Some of them, by the way, we could make the case, we can show deterministically, they break down, they don't persist, they're fine. And then some of them, we could say like, look, there's a cumulative effect. As more of these molecules enter our body and some of them stay in our body, they over time increase the probability of things like DNA breaks resulting in cancer, or things like endocrine disruption resulting in metabolic effects, or things like we might be seeing now with folate receptor autoantibody presentations that drive autism spectrum disorder. So I think that there's a lot to be said, generally speaking, about the cumulative effect about a lot of the stuff we put in our environment. And as much as I could disagree with things that Bobby Kennedy might say, I can tell you asking these questions is critically important. As scientists, we have to constantly interrogate, and this cannot be just a political point. I'm not like going to sit here and say I agree with the statements that might be made by the president when he says never take acetaminophen. I think it's a little more nuanced than that, frankly. But I do think that the idea that we should be asking the questions and interrogating for answers is very, very important. And so
I think that's an important takeaway, because if you talk to people who have been impacted by this and people in the community, the reaction was, we're glad we're getting a lot of attention. Yeah, that was a weird press conference on the margins, but we're glad that this is a focus now. And I think people are also glad about vaccines. Again, I don't think we should be banning vaccines, but I do like the idea that we're questioning all these things and we're not just giving the medical industrial complex a complete pass on this, and that we're spending money and investing in it. So let's go on to our next story around censorship.
How much money do you think is spent in the USA annually on autism?
Gosh,
Do you think it's enough to fund a longitudinal trial?
yeah, I mean, I don't have the data to know. And then I guess you would, on a societal basis, you would be thinking, is there a better use of capital, right? But we're a rich country. We have the ability to fund some of the stuff. And there's private companies who
Well,
probably would fund this too.
I
Right?
bet you we're wasting money in all kinds of random places where
Yeah.
finding a few $1 billion to run this trial is a good thing.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. All right, we've got a lot of news in the censorship space. So this is This Week in Censorship. So much to talk about. First story up, Jimmy Kimmel is back on the air. Earlier this week, Disney announced that ABC would resume airing Kimmel's show. And I think that was Tuesday night. Disney explained why they suspended Kimmel last week to avoid further inflaming a tense situation at an emotional moment for our country. And they call Kimmel's comments ill-timed and thus insensitive. He came back and had a massive amount of reach. But Nexar and Sinclair's affiliates, they decided to not air it, and that was 60% of the market. So interesting, Polymarket had Jimmy Kimmel canceled by September 30th. It was nearly 80%. Kimmel was suspended last week, but that's plummeted to 1% since then. It was quite emotional. I'm guessing everybody watched it, and
I did not watch it.
Oh, you didn't watch it? Okay, well, play it. Totally makes sense. All right, we've got a lot of news in the censorship space. So this is This Week in Censorship. So much to talk about. First story up, Jimmy Kimmel is back on the air. Earlier this week, Disney announced that ABC would resume airing Kimmel's show. And I think that was Tuesday night. Disney explained why they suspended Kimmel last week to avoid further inflaming a tense situation at an emotional moment for our country. And they call Kimmel's comments ill-timed and thus insensitive. He came back and had a massive amount of reach. But Nexar and Sinclair's affiliates, they decided to not air it, and that was 60% of the market. So interesting, Polymarket had Jimmy Kimmel canceled by September 30th. It was nearly 80%. Kimmel was suspended last week, but that's plummeted to 1% since then. It was quite emotional. I'm guessing everybody watched it, and
I did not watch it.
Oh, you didn't watch it? Okay, well, we'll play a clip here. It was. I felt
you should watch what he said.
And yeah, it was incredibly heartfelt and deft in terms of its execution. It was sincere. And here it is.
I don't think what I have to say is going to make much of a difference. If you like me, you like me. If you don't, you don't. I have no illusions about changing anyone's mind. But I do want to make something clear because it's important to me as a human, and that is, you understand that it was never my intention to make light of the murder of a young man. I don't think there's anything funny about it. I posted a message on Instagram on the day he was killed, sending love to his family and asking for compassion, and I meant it. I still do. Nor was it my intention to blame any specific group for the actions of what it was obviously a deeply disturbed individual. That was really the opposite of the point I was trying to make, but I understand that to some that felt either ill-timed or unclear, or maybe both. And for those who think I did point a finger, I get why you're upset. If the situation was reversed, there's a good chance I'd have felt the same way. I have many friends and family members on the other side who I love and remain close to, even though we don't agree on politics at all. I don't think the murderer who shot Charlie Kirk represents anyone. This was a sick person who believed violence was a solution, and it isn't. Ever.
Yeah, and he references later in this apology of sorts. I think it's pretty clear he was apologizing his own faith, his Christianity, and just how beautiful it was that the widow of Charlie Kirk had forgiven the shooter. And he got broken up about that as well. He then went on to do a bunch of jokes and have a normal show. It was massive ratings. Obviously, everybody was tuned into it, and we'll see.
He didn't
where it goes from
apologize.
here.
I didn't hear an apology.
Okay.
Did he apologize? Do you know?
I
do you know
took
what
it as
that
an
means
apology.
in the English language? My understanding, if you look at Twitter and stuff, is that there was not technically an apology.
Okay.
He didn't apologize and he didn't say what he had done wrong. I guess what he said is that I didn't mean to make light of
It wasn't my
the
intent.
situation.
Yeah, it wasn't my intent. Yeah.
It wasn't his
It was
intent.
an explanation more than an apology? Okay.
Nobody was accusing him of making light of the murder. What he did, and what people were upset about, is that he lied and said that the shooter was MAGA. And he did not hit the nail on the head in terms of addressing that. And he's being called out for that. Now look, I still think that his statement there, let's call it an apology, was constructive and positive because at least he is showing empathy towards the other side. He obviously feels bad for Erica Kirk and for Charlie Kirk, and in the current overheated political environment, is expressing empathy for the other side is a positive statement. And I think he definitely brought the temperature down. And I think later in the statement, he also makes an important point about, he says, you know, just selfishly, I have threats on me. And what he's basically saying is, look, we don't want to get into a civil war here. We don't want to get into a cycle of tit for tat retaliation. Let's not play Hatfields and McCoys. This is my words. He didn't say this, but that was sort of the intimation of what he was saying. And I think that is a good thing to say. I mean, no one here should want a civil war, and this thing could go off the rails really badly. So, look, I think that his statements were positive and welcome, and they showed empathy for the other side, but he did not fess up to what he really did wrong here, which was to claim that the shooter was MAGA. That was the thing that was deeply offensive.
Yeah.
And hold on, and the reason why he did that is he was not the only one doing it. In the early days of this shooting, this assassination, it was a talking point on the left that this shooter could be right-wing. And the reason why people on the left were saying that is it was exculpatory. It was basically to put the blame on the other side instead of looking in the mirror and popping to the fact that there is this rise of left-wing political violence and assassination culture. As we demonstrated on the pod last week by looking at all the data and all the numbers, there really is this poisonous ideology that is on the left. And yes, there's some of it on the right, but way more of it on the left, that political violence can be used to solve problems. And the left really does need to look in the mirror and rid itself of that ideology. And by not admitting that this assassin was motivated by that ideology, they are ignoring that opportunity for self-reflection and for progress.
That last part is important. I think the point is that when you say that somebody is mentally deranged, what most normal people do is then say, oh, it was an aberration, it was an outlier. And I think that that is a dangerous way to try to sweep under the rug what is something that's more virulent and is increasingly acceptable in society.
This guy might have been crazy in the sense that he was willing to use murder to achieve his objectives. I think we can all say on some level that's crazy. It doesn't mean he wasn't animated by an ideology that lots of people believe. And I think the proof of this was the celebratory reaction to the assassination of Charlie Kirk. You saw it on TikTok, you saw it on Blue Sky, you saw it on corners of social media, you definitely saw it on Reddit, where you had thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk and basically buying into this idea of political violence as the solution to their problem and to the idea that it was acceptable to use violence against people they hated. And so, again, this is the problem with the random nut theory, is that it really ignores all the evidence we have about the larger reaction to the Charlie Kirk assassination. And this is the thing that the left really doesn't want to confront. It does not want to look in the mirror here and say that we have a problem on the left with this assassination culture. And we talked about this last week. And if you look at polling, they just did polling around this, and there's still millions of people on the left who believe that the shooter was MAGA. And Jimmy Kimmel helped foster that belief with this disinformation that he put out there. And he really should have hit the nail on the head in terms of saying that he got that wrong, that it was wrong to say that, and he could have been a little bit clearer about that. I'm not dismissing the positive things he said, because I do think it was good for him to show that. I mean, I'm going to give him credit for getting emotional. I know a lot of people on the right think that it wasn't sincere. I think that it probably was sincere. I'm going to give him credit for that. I think his comments were constructive, but he did not apologize for the thing he actually did wrong. And in fact, he just replaced that original lie with a new form of left-wing spin, which was the random nut theory. And I think, let me stop there. But the point is that really we need to come to grips with the fact that there is this toxic political ideology now that's mostly on the left that does need to be confronted.
I'm going to go ahead and say, we should clean up a little bit here, or I'm going to clean up. He should have, I think, made it clear that this wasn't a MAGA person, but I'm just going to repeat the quote. We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it. Now, he should have said that turned out not to be true. It was actually a liberal. And I think it was not that he said the guy was MAGA. He said people were speculating he was MAGA. That actually was true. So just to be clear here, he never said the person was MAGA.
Wait, who was speculating? The MAGA
the
people were never
weekend when
speculating.
it happened.